I'm going to make them pay for every sleepless night. The third dead rat appeared on my doorstep this morning. My hand shook as I took photos, carefully adding them to my growing collection of evidence. 2 weeks of escalating harassment since I'd asked them to turn down their music at 2 a.m. 2 weeks of hell. The Ramirez family had declared war after my noise complaint. First came the late-night practice sessions with their teenage son's garage band. Then the mysterious garbage that kept appearing in my yard. Now dead animals. Each morning brought a new form of torment, each night another opportunity for them to steal my peace. I stared at the rat, neatly positioned to greet me when I opened my door. They wanted a reaction. They were hoping I'd storm across the lawn, screaming and threatening, giving them exactly what they needed to paint me as the neighborhood psycho. Not this time. My programming job required focus, something impossible with walls that seemed to amplify every bass note from next door. My deadline was in 3 days, and I'd barely written 100 lines of functional code. I couldn't afford to move. Denver's housing market had exploded, and breaking my lease would cost thousands. I was trapped. Officer Paulson's squad car pulled up to the curb. Third time this week. I'd call them after finding the rat, knowing full well nothing would come of it. He stepped out, his expression already resigned. "Morning, Mr. Hartman," he said, nodding at the rat. "Another gift from your admirers?" "Evidence," I corrected, pointing to my phone. "I've documented everything. Timestamps, photos, audio recordings." He sighed. "Look, Alex, we've been through this. Without catching them in the act, there's not much I can do. These pranks aren't enough for a restraining order." "Pranks?" My voice rose despite my attempts to stay calm. "They've escalated to dead animals. What's next? A brick through my window?" Paulson knelt, examining the rat without touching it. "Could be neighborhood cats. You've got a lot of strays around here." That positioned itself perfectly on my welcome mat. I felt that familiar tightness in my chest, the same social anxiety that had kept me isolated long before the Ramirez family moved in. "Officer, they're targeting me because they know I work from home. They know I can't escape this." He stood, brushing off his pants. "I'll talk to them again, but honestly, my suggestion is to make peace. Bring over a 6-pack, apologize for the noise complaint." Apologize. The word tasted bitter. For asking them to follow apartment rules at 2 a.m.? Sometimes peace is worth more than being right. He handed me a pair of disposable gloves. "Use these to remove the rat. And Alex? Try to get some sleep. You look terrible." I watched him walk to the Ramirez's door, knock politely, and disappear inside. They'd offer him coffee, laugh about their high-strung neighbor, and nothing would change. Just like the last 2 times. My phone buzzed, a text from Dave, the neighbor on my right who had initially supported my complaints. "Maybe drop it, man. Not worth the hassle." Another ally lost. Dave had backed me at the first tenant meeting when I'd raised the noise issue. Now he was friendly with the Ramirezes, often joining their weekend barbecues. The betrayal stung more than I wanted to admit. Inside my apartment, I settled at my desk, trying to focus on code instead of the muffled laughter coming from next door. Officer Paulson was leaving the Ramirez apartment, shaking Mr. Ramirez's hand like they were old friends. I turned back to my screen, where an urgent email from my project manager demanded attention. "Alex, clients need progress update today. Screenshots of functionality?" My stomach clenched. I had nothing to show after a week of disrupted work. I needed sleep. I needed quiet. I needed one day without psychological warfare from the family next door. A notification popped up from my banking app. Rent due in 3 days. My savings had dwindled during my last bout of unemployment. I couldn't afford to lose this job. The walls of my apartment seemed to close in as another round of bass-heavy music began thumping next door. Something black and small sat in the corner of my living room. Another rat? I approached cautiously, then recognized my portable hard drive soaked. Water dripped from the ceiling above it, forming a small puddle on my hardwood floor. I grabbed a towel and pressed it against the ceiling. Water continued to seep through, steady and deliberate. This wasn't a random leak. I ran to the bathroom, grabbed more towels, then climbed on a chair to examine the wet spot. Someone had turned on water above me and left it running. The Ramirez family lived next door, not upstairs. Who was up there? The answer hit me immediately. Rosa Ramirez's sister had moved in 2 months ago. I'd never met her, but I'd seen her visiting next door regularly before taking the upstairs unit. I pounded on my ceiling with a broom handle. The water continued to flow. I tried calling the building manager, but as usual, it went straight to voicemail. By the time I collected every towel and pot in my apartment to contain the spreading water, my doorbell rang. Rosa Ramirez stood there, her teenage son Miguel slouching behind her. They both wore expressions of exaggerated concern. "We heard some banging," she said. "Everything okay, neighbor?" I stepped aside, gesturing to the growing puddle in my living room. "Your sister's apartment is flooding mine." Rosa's eyebrows rose. "My sister? She's at work. Must be a pipe problem." Her eyes traveled to my desk, where my computer sat dangerously close to the spreading water. "Oh my, you should move your things. Water and electronics, you know." Miguel snickered behind her. I caught the flash of satisfaction in Rosa's eyes before she masked it with concern. This was intentional. They knew exactly what they were doing. "I've called maintenance," I lied. "They're reviewing the security footage now." Rosa's smile faltered. "What security footage?" "Hallways, exterior doors," I improvised. "Standard procedure for water damage claims to determine liability." Mother and son exchanged glances. Miguel whispered something in Spanish, and Rosa shook her head slightly. "Well, good luck with that. We're having a family dinner tonight. You're welcome to join if you're displaced." Her emphasis on the last word was subtle but unmistakable. After they left, I rushed to salvage what I could. My portable drive was ruined, along with the backup of my project files. My laptop had escaped damage, but the water was approaching my desktop computer and the router. I moved everything to the kitchen counter, away from the spreading puddle. The ceiling continued to leak for another 20 minutes before suddenly stopping. By then, half my living room was soaked. The hardwood floors, the main reason I'd chosen this apartment, were already beginning to warp. I sank onto a kitchen chair, exhaustion washing over me. Would insurance cover this? Would they believe this was targeted harassment? How much work had I lost? My thoughts raced, calculating hours needed to recreate the lost code, deadlines that would be missed, clients who would be disappointed. My phone buzzed with another text from my project manager. "Alex? Update needed ASAP." I stared at the message, struggling to formulate a response that wouldn't get me fired. How could I explain that my neighbor's vendetta had just destroyed days of work? That I needed more time because I was locked in a psychological war I was clearly losing? "Working on it," I typed. "Had a technical issue. We'll send update by end of day." The reply came seconds later. "Client meeting tomorrow AM. Need deliverables tonight." I looked around my water-damaged apartment, at the towels and buckets collecting dirty water, and my electronics hastily piled on the kitchen counter. Something inside me, something that had been stretched too thin for too long, finally snapped. They wanted war? Fine. I'd been playing defense, documenting every incident, following proper channels, trusting the system to work. But the system was failing me. Officer Paulson, the building manager, even Dave, they'd all abandoned me or sided with the Ramirezes. It was time to play offense. I grabbed my laptop and began searching for information about the Ramirez family. Social media accounts, public records, anything that might give me leverage. Miguel's Instagram was public, filled with typical teenage posturing and, more interestingly, photos of their apartment interior. I studied the layout, noting the sliding glass door to their patio, the proximity of bedrooms to common walls. Rosa worked at Denver General Hospital. Her husband Carlos had an auto repair shop across town. Their schedules, also helpfully shared on social media, showed a 2-hour window tomorrow when the apartment would be empty. Miguel would be at school, Rosa at her shift, Carlos at the garage. Next, I ordered several items online with rush delivery. Motion-activated cameras disguised as smoke detectors, directional microphones, and my secret weapon, a device that would turn their own tactics against them. While waiting for my packages, I set up a simple audio recording system using my existing equipment. I positioned microphones against the shared wall, capturing the Ramirez family shouting, music, and laughter throughout the evening. I felt a grim satisfaction as I edited the recordings, amplifying specific frequencies, creating a concentrated audio file of pure disruption. My deliveries arrived the next morning. I called in sick to work, buying myself time to implement my plan. As predicted, the Ramirez apartment emptied at 9:15 a.m. I waited 30 minutes to ensure no one would return for forgotten items, then went to work. First, I installed the hidden cameras in the hallway outside my door and in the stairwell leading to Rosa's sister's apartment. Nothing illegal. These were common areas, and I needed evidence of their comings and goings. Next, I created a small water leak of my own, just enough to necessitate maintenance accessing both our apartments to check the pipes. When the building manager finally answered his phone, The urgency of water damage got his immediate attention. "I'll send someone right away," he promised. "They'll need to check all surrounding units to locate the source." Perfect. While the maintenance worker investigated, I hovered nearby, watching as he used his master key to enter the Ramirez apartment. I glimpsed the interior, notably, the large speaker system positioned directly against our shared wall. The maintenance worker noted it too. "Those speakers right against the wall? That's probably what your noise complaints are about," he commented. "Not supposed to have systems that big without proper acoustic barriers." I played innocent. "Is that against building policy?" "Yep. Says so right in the lease. No audio equipment over certain wattage without approved insulation." He made a note on his clipboard. "I'll have to report this." A small victory, but I wasn't stopping there. While he checked the plumbing, I subtly placed one of my directional microphones where it could capture sound from their apartment. Not inside, that would be illegal, but positioned to enhance what naturally traveled through the ventilation system. After the maintenance worker left, I finished setting up my system. The cameras would alert me to anyone approaching my door. The microphones would provide evidence of noise violations. And my special device, a targeted vibration generator, was ready for deployment. That night, after confirming all 3 Ramirezes were home, I activated the generator. The device, attached to my side of the shared wall, would create low-frequency vibrations that would resonate through their apartment structure. Not loud enough to be obvious harassment, but persistent enough to be maddening, like a phantom bass note that never quite stopped. I monitored their reactions through my audio setup. First came confusion, comments about strange sounds, checking their own speakers. Then Miguel's complaints about headaches. Finally, around midnight, Carlos's frustrated shout, "What is that goddamn noise?" I smiled for the first time in weeks. Over the next 3 days, I established a pattern. During their loudest periods, I document everything. During their quiet hours, especially when they were trying to sleep, I'd activate my system. Not long enough to prove harassment, but just enough to disrupt their rest. I was giving them a taste of their own medicine, the sleepless nights, the constant tension, the feeling of powerlessness. Meanwhile, I caught up on my work project during their work and school hours, when I knew I'd have peace. I submitted my deliverables just under deadline, earning a reprieve from my manager. On the 4th morning, my doorbell rang. Officer Paulson stood there, looking uncomfortable. "Mr. Ramirez filed a noise complaint," he said without preamble. "Says you've been creating disturbances at night." I feigned surprise. "Me? Officer, you know the situation here. I've been the one complaining about noise for weeks. He has recordings. So do I." I invited him in, playing my carefully edited compilation of 2 weeks of Ramirez noise violations. Time-stamped and dated. "I also have this." I showed him footage from my hallway camera of Miguel placing the dead rat on my doorstep. Paulson's expression changed. "This is actual evidence. Why didn't you show me this before?" "I just installed the cameras recently, after the water damage." I pulled up the footage of Rose's sister entering the upstairs apartment minutes before my ceiling started leaking, then leaving shortly after it stopped. Interesting timing, wouldn't you say? He reviewed the footage again, his professional demeanor returning. "This is actionable. Vandalism, harassment, property damage. I'll need copies of everything." Of course, I've documented everything meticulously. I handed him a USB drive with selected files, careful to exclude any evidence of my own countermeasures. "I just want to live in peace, officer." As he was leaving, the building manager approached, heading directly for the Ramirez apartment with an official-looking document in hand. He nodded curtly to me before knocking on their door. Through my audio setup, I heard the conversation. A formal warning about lease violations, specifically their unauthorized audio equipment and complaints from multiple neighbors about noise. One more incident would result in eviction. I hadn't expected that. Apparently, Dave and other neighbors had finally reached their limit as well. The Ramirezes had overplayed their hand, harassing me so blatantly that they'd alienated everyone. That evening, an unusual silence fell over the Ramirez apartment. My cameras caught Miguel removing the speakers from the wall, relocating them to an inner room. Rose's sister came down to visit, their conversation hushed but tense as they discussed the noise warning and Officer Paulson's visit. I should have felt vindicated. Instead, I felt hollow. I'd become someone I didn't recognize, obsessed with surveillance, plotting revenge, deriving satisfaction from others' discomfort. Yes, they'd started it. Yes, they'd pushed me to my breaking point. But the person I'd become in response frightened me. The next morning, I dismantled my vibration device. I kept the cameras. Those were legitimate security measures, but turned off the audio surveillance. Then I did something unexpected. I knocked on the Ramirez door. Carlos answered, his expression immediately hostile. "What do you want?" "To end this," I said simply. "This war between us is destroying my life, and I suspect it's not helping yours either." He started to close the door, but Rosa appeared behind him. "Let him speak, Carlos." I took a deep breath. "I have evidence. Dead rats, water damage, noise violations. Enough to get you evicted or worse. But I don't want that. I just want peace." "You're threatening us?" Carlos stepped forward. "No. I'm offering a truce. You stop harassing me, I delete the evidence. We live our separate lives, respecting normal quiet hours. That's all I ever wanted." Rosa and Carlos exchanged glances. Miguel appeared in the hallway behind them, looking less cocky than usual. "Why would you do that?" Rosa asked suspiciously. "Because this apartment is all I can afford right now. Because I need to focus on saving my job. And because I don't want to be the kind of person who destroys a family's housing situation, even if they've made my life hell." Something in my tone must have reached them. The raw honesty of someone at the end of their rope, trying to find a way back to normalcy. "You have our attention," Rosa said finally. "What exactly are you proposing?" 2 days later, the building manager conducted an inspection of both our apartments. The Ramirez family had installed proper acoustic insulation around their audio equipment. I had removed my surveillance equipment except for the external security cameras, which the manager actually approved as a safety measure. We established clear quiet hours, no loud music after 10 p.m. on weekdays, midnight on weekends. In return, I agreed to be more flexible about occasional family gatherings and celebrations with advance notice. Was it perfect? No. I still caught Miguel glaring at me in the hallway. Carlos was coldly civil at best. But the dead animals stopped. The water leaks ceased. And most importantly, I could sleep and work again. Officer Paulson seemed pleasantly surprised when he stopped by to follow up. "Didn't expect this outcome," he admitted. "Usually these neighbor disputes just escalate until someone moves. Sometimes finding leverage is the first step toward finding peace," I replied. He gave me an appraising look. "You know, we could use someone with your attention to detail and technical skills. Ever considered civilian work with the department? IT security, surveillance analysis?" I hadn't, but the idea was intriguing. My current contract was ending soon anyway, and a career change might be exactly what I needed. As he left, I noticed Dave watching from his doorway. He approached awkwardly. "Heard you, and the Ramirez's worked things out," he said. "Pretty impressive." "They weren't exactly. Reasonable. People rarely are when they think they have all the power," I replied. "Sometimes you need to change that perception before you can change the relationship." Dave nodded. "Look, about bailing on you. I should have backed you up more. You made the calculation most people would make. Why fight a battle that isn't yours?" I found I couldn't really blame him anymore. But thanks for eventually complaining about the noise. It helped. That night, I sat on my patio in actual silence, savoring the rare peace. My apartment was still damaged. Insurance would cover most repairs, but the process would take time. My job was hanging by a thread, my savings depleted. This victory had come at a steep cost. Yet something had changed inside me. The anxiety that had defined so much of my life had transformed. Not disappeared. I didn't expect miracles, but evolved into something more like vigilance. I discovered I wasn't helpless. That knowledge was both empowering and sobering. I'd nearly crossed a line in my quest for justice, nearly become someone I'd hate. The recognition of that potential in myself was perhaps the most valuable lesson from this ordeal. As I sipped my coffee, Miguel Ramirez walked past on his way to meet friends. He gave me a barely perceptible nod, not friendly, but acknowledging. Progress, of a sort. Noise complaints, dead rats, water damage. Was my approach to the neighbor ward justified? Would you have gone further or stopped sooner?